Ladies and gentlemen, the season is not over, and it's going to be a fun season. You know why? Because every season is a fun season. Welcome, everyone, to the Monday edition of Fair Territory. We've got a lot to get to today, and a lot of it, yes, is going to be Dodgers related. We're going to go through exactly what their team looks like now that they've seemingly completed most of their offseason. And then we'll get to, in the inside dish, the whole good for the game argument. Whether they are good for the game, whether they are destroying the game, we'll get to all of that. But first, I want to talk about the team itself. Because what the Dodgers have done this offseason, well, it's not spending $1 billion like they did last offseason, but they've done some pretty impressive things, to say the least. 6 of the Athletics' top 40 free agents, according to their big board, are now Los Angeles Dodgers. Blake Snell and Roki Sasaki as starting pitchers, Blake Trinan and Tanner Scott as relievers, Teo Hernandez and Michael Conforto as outfielders, and of course, Ha-Seong Kim will be a utility man in the infield. They've put together quite a roster. Yes, they are trying to be the first back-to-back World Series champions since 1998 to 2000, when the Yankees won 3 in a row. So I want to take you through their rotation and their bullpen, and just to see how powerful the Dodgers look right now. And again, we're talking strictly baseball in this segment. We'll get to all the other stuff in the next one. So let's start with their rotation. And of course, keep in mind, this rotation has a major addition this year that is not coming from the outside. That major addition is the guy who is photographed there, pictured. That would be Shohei Ohtani. Ohtani, Snell, Yamamoto, Glasnow, Sasaki, all guys with plus stuff. All guys also who will be most likely limited in terms of innings in some way. Snell, I guess, is the workhorse of that group, at least so far. He's never pitched more than 180 and 2/3 innings in a season. So it's a powerhouse rotation. There's no doubt about that. You've also got Dustin May and Tony Gonsolin coming off injuries. You've got Clayton Kershaw most likely rejoining the team at some point, whether it's, I don't know, sometime in spring training or in the second half. And that is the rotation. That is 8 big names right there off the top of my head. And that's before Landon Knack and any of their youngsters that could figure into the mix as well. All right, now let's look at their bullpen, which also, with the addition of Tanner Scott, is looking quite powerful. Scott at the back end, Michael Kopech and Evan Phillips, along with Trinan setting up, Vesia the lefty, Banda, and probably in the second half, when he comes back from shoulder surgery, Brusdar Graterol, who is quite an effective reliever when he's healthy. Of course, he's not healthy right now. So this team, with, of course, that pitching staff and the lineup that includes Ohtani, Freddie Freeman, Mookie Betts, Will Smith, Teo Hernandez, right down the line, is going to be an impressive-looking group. There's no doubt about that. Now, will they win 120 games? I sort of doubt it. And Mike Petriello of MLB.com had a funny tweet the other day, basically saying, yeah, the Dodgers have added all these starting pitchers, and at the deadline, they're still going to be trying to get Bailey Ober or somebody like that. It's a perceptive tweet because last year, they were in exactly that situation. For all of their might, what did they do at the deadline? They added Jack Flaherty. And then in the postseason, what did they need? They needed not only Flaherty to be essentially their number one starter, they needed Walker Buehler, who had not pitched well all offseason since coming off Tommy John and some other injuries, to be a stalwart in the latter 2 rounds of the playoffs. That's how they won the World Series, with those 2 guys. So there's no guarantees in this sport. There's no guarantee that the Dodgers are going to be this super team. You've heard it time and time again. The team that wins the offseason doesn't necessarily win the regular season or the playoffs. And let's not forget, the Dodgers, 2022, knocked out in the division series. The Dodgers, 2023, knocked out in the division series. The Dodgers, 2024, were down 2-1 to the Padres in the division series with Game 4 in San Diego, and the Dodgers about to throw a bullpen game. Yeah, the Dodgers prevailed in that series, but they were seriously in a situation where their backs were against the wall. So again, there are no guarantees in this sport. We'll see how this season plays out. We'll see how the playoffs play out. And yeah, there's a big challenge ahead for the 29 other teams. That's just what it's going to be in 2025 in Major League Baseball. All right, we have a big announcement coming tomorrow. I'm not talking about any transaction here. I'm talking about the Hall of Fame announcement. And of course, it's always a big day in the Major League Baseball offseason. It's a thrilling day for the inductees and for fans of those players. And at times, it's a quite disappointing day for fans of players who do not get elected, and of course, those players themselves. Now, Ryan Thibodeau over at the Hall of Fame Tracker does a tremendous job on X, keeping track of all of the ballots. And as of Monday morning, we're going to take a look now at where this stood. Of course, more ballots coming into play as each hour passes, but here's where it stood on early Monday morning. Ichiro at 100% of the ballots. CC Sabathia, 93.1. Billy Wagner, 85.1. Carlos Beltran, 80.6. Of course, 75% of the ballots required to be inducted into the Hall of Fame. Andruw Jones was the next closest at 72.6. This was 44.6 of the known ballots. Now, here's my warning. My warning is that, generally speaking, the actual results are lower than the tracker results. So let's say Ichiro's at 100 right now. Actually, let's use CC as a better example. CC's at 94 or so. I don't expect him to get 94% of the vote. Might he get 80? Yes. But generally speaking, the numbers in the trackers are higher than the numbers that actually come out once all of the ballots are known and released by the National Baseball Hall of Fame. You saw some names there too. I want to take one more look at the tracker and show you something. We saw some names that are not tracking to even get the minimum 5% required to stay on the ballot. Those names include Russell Martin and Brian McCann, along with Ian Kinsler and Torrey Hunter. Torrey Hunter is interesting. You've heard AJ Przinsky talk on Foul Territory about, well, if Andruw Jones is getting this much support, why isn't Torrey Hunter? He played with both. He thinks they're comparable. They are comparable. Jones is a better candidate if you look at WAR and if you look at all of those consecutive Gold Gloves. We can have that debate. But certainly it should be a closer split than 72% to 1.7 or whatever it was there. The other interesting thing there, Brian McCann and Russell Martin. Now, I've seen some things written and some interesting thoughts by different people over the last, month or so about how McCann and Martin are actually better candidates than people might think because they were such excellent framers. Now, it's a discussion. It's a discussion to have, a debate to have, but I don't see it myself. I don't see those guys as Hall of Famers. I saw them as really good players. And yeah, it turns out they were good framers too. That at that time, we didn't even track that skill. Doesn't mean it didn't matter. And of course, teams valued that from those players. But I am not going to elect the player to the Hall of Fame who goes over the top because of his framing. It's a skill that is likely to be eliminated once we go to an automatic strike zone. And I just don't see it being that important. It's important, no question. But to me, Hall of Fame catchers are guys like Posey and Molina and Maurer. They were a cut above McCann and Martin, even though McCann and Martin were really good players. We have this conversation all the time about so many different players. There's the Hall of the Very Good, and there's the Hall of Fame. And a lot of us, all of us really, have our own opinions about what's the Hall of Very Good and who belongs in the Hall of Fame. And that is the beauty of this whole thing. So what do I expect tomorrow on Tuesday when the announcement comes? I do expect Ichiro to be a Hall of Famer. If not unanimous, then really close. And I expect CC Sabathia and Billy Wagner to get in as well. We'll see how it all plays out. Maybe Beltran is in this class as well, the way he's tracking. But those three guys I expect to be in. Ichiro, CC, and Billy Wagner. That will be a heck of a group of BBWAA electees. We'll see how it all plays out on Tuesday. Time now for the Inside Dish, the part of the show where I talk about something I've written, a trend in the game, or something that is compelling going on in the game right now. This week, it's the latter category, something compelling in the game right now. The question that is on a lot of fans' minds and sparking a lot of debate among fans and even people in the game. Are the Dodgers good or bad for baseball? Now, the answer to this question depends in part on where you live. If you live in Los Angeles, you probably think the Dodgers are really good for baseball. If you live in New York and Philly and some other cities where teams spend a lot of money, you understand what is going on and certainly would like your team to even be more like the Dodgers. And then if you live in places like, Cleveland and Tampa Bay and Miami and other small markets in the major leagues, Milwaukee's a great example. to this. And let's start with a tweet from the Athletics' Aaron Gleeman just the other day after the Dodgers signed, I believe it was after they signed Tanner Scott. Let's look at what Aaron said because it's kind of interesting. It's a good starting point for this discussion. Aaron says the Dodgers payroll is $370 million per Fangraphs. This is with Scott. Meanwhile, the whole AL Central division has a combined payroll of $544 million spread across 5 teams. $370 million for the Dodgers, $544 for the AL Central. The Dodgers spending will get 100 times more attention than the AL Central's lack of spending, but it's two sides of the same coin. Now, Aaron covers the Twins for us, and he has a great knowledge, of course, of that division. And he makes a good point. The Dodgers spending is a high percentage of an entire division's spending, the AL Central. But let's look at the AL Central and where they are. Now, granted, those markets in general are smaller than the Los Angeles, of course. But what are we talking about here? We're talking about the Minnesota Twins, a team that won a playoff series for the first time in 21 years in 2023 and then cut payroll. We're talking about the Guardians, a team that goes to the ALCS last year with a patchwork rotation, but they made it. And then they trade their first baseman, trade their second baseman, and they're looking at right now a lower payroll than last year. We're talking about the Kansas City Royals, the one team in the division that seems to be really trying as hard as it can from a spending standpoint. We're talking about the Detroit Tigers, a team that has a miraculous season with a great young core last year. And all they do this offseason is spend $15 million on Alex Cobb and $15 million on Gleyber Torres. And then we're talking about the Chicago White Sox, who are a big market team and yet are a complete mess. So part of the reason why these teams are so modest in their payroll is their own decision-making, their own ownerships. Now, I want to show you another tweet, this one put out by Fox Sports over the weekend as well, about the almighty NFL, the league that can do no wrong. Let's look at this tweet. This one says, either Mahomes or Brady have been in the AFC Championship the last 14 years. That's the Patriots and the Chiefs. In the AFC Championship the last 14 years, this is the 7th straight year the Kansas City Chiefs have been in the AFC Championship. And you might say, well, Ken, look at it. They're a small market. They're able to do that because the NFL has a salary cap. They're able to do that because they have a great coach and they have a great quarterback, just like the Patriots did all those years ago. Well, yes, but the question is competitive balance. That's the whole issue here. That's the whole thing that we're concerned about with baseball. Is there enough competitive balance? I would suggest to you in the NFL and another salary cap sport, the NBA, where you see players come together for super teams and where you see teams dominate over certain periods, though not in the last 6 years or so where they've had different champions. But have competitive balance issues as well. This sport, as I said in the first segment, has not had a repeat champion since the Yankees 98 to 2000. And now, with a 12-team playoff, with expanded playoffs, it's more difficult to get through the entire playoffs. The Dodgers did it last year, and they barely did it, as I mentioned in the first segment, barely got out of the division series. And then the 2 years prior, they didn't do it at all. So that part of it, to me, the competitive balance question, oh, of course, it's much more difficult for teams in smaller markets to sustain success. That is the economic model of baseball. And yes, to some degree, it is flawed. And we can discuss that as well. But the idea that this team is just going to roll next year and for the next 5 years, no, I don't buy it. History tells us that's simply not the case. Also in this sport, there's a value, in my opinion, actually a value in any sport, to having a team at the top that is the villain. There's a value to it when it was the Yankees in the 1920s and the 1950s and even beyond that. And there's a value to it right now. Every other team has someone to point to. Every other fan base can hope that their team is the one that knocks off Goliath, the way the Diamondbacks did 2 years ago and the Padres did 3 years ago. Yeah, there's value in that. And also, for a sport that supposedly is in such trouble, attendance is up each of the last 2 years. Now, a lot of that is due to the pitch clock and the aesthetic changes that have improved the game. But it shows you again that fans aren't exactly walking away, and I don't expect they're going to walk away this year. It's simply not the way it works. For all the complaining, attendance is up. The Dodgers road attendance last year, after their $1 billion offseason that offended so many people, was the highest in the major leagues since 2008. I'll repeat that. The Dodgers road attendance last year, highest in the majors since 2008. And of course, they lead the league in home attendance virtually every year. If this sport was dying, you wouldn't have private equity firms buying into teams, as we've seen with the Cubs, the Giants, and several others. So I'm not going to buy that argument. The question about them being bad for baseball, they're playing by the rules. They're doing nothing that is untoward. They are a team that is taking advantage of its extreme financial might. Its $8.35 billion deal, local television deal, over a 25-year period, that deal is intact while so many others have fallen apart. That is a problem in baseball, no question. And the teams that have lost TV money certainly need to get back to a position where they're in a stronger financial area. We all get that. We all get that in a sport built on local revenue, as baseball is, it's not going to be as easy to have equity as it is in the NFL, where the national television contract dictates most of the revenue. Now, the salary cap question is one that's going to come up again and again, and it's going to come up once this CBA expires in 2026. Actually, it's coming up already. Should this sport have a salary cap? You can make that argument. I prefer the free market system. I do believe that if you want a salary cap and you think that's going to save this sport, you better be prepared to lose the 2027 season. And some fans have said, yeah, that would be worth it. I believe some owners think that would be worth it. To me, if this sport loses a season, that would be really something that would contribute to its demise, or at least a stall or a regression of some kind. We saw it in 95. It took a while for baseball to come back. Now, what can be done? How do we make the playing field more level? One way would be to get new ownerships in place in some of these cities. And I'm not just talking about the small markets. You might have heard Tom Ricketts' comments over the weekend. Well, let's see what he said, because his comments were rather telling about a supposed big market team. Here's what Tom Ricketts said on 670 The Score from the Cubs convention. I don't think fans should spend all their time thinking about which team has more money or how much they're spending. It just becomes a big narrative that's a distraction. Yeah, you don't want that narrative when you're not spending. Okay, here's the other quote. I think our fans somehow think we have all these dollars that the Dodgers have or the Mets have or the Yankees have, and we just keep it. It's not true. We just try to break even every year. You hear this from ownership from time to time. We're just trying to break even. If that's true, and you want to support that claim, then open your books. In this sport, ownership doesn't open its books. The only time we get insight into that is through the teams that are publicly owned, like the Atlanta Braves and the Toronto Blue Jays. And if Tom Ricketts suggests that the Cubs are breaking even, I would suggest that he's not counting all the money that they're generating in their Wrigleyville renovations and all of that. So you have big market teams like the Cubs and the Red Sox not spending to the level that they should be. And of course, you have some of the issues that we are perennially facing with the smaller market teams. I do believe the CBA can be tweaked to enhance the positions of those clubs. One way to do it, the guy, MLB executive Burner, I assume it's a guy, maybe it's a woman, he has repeatedly said, stop counting the present day value number of a player's salary in the luxury tax calculation. So the way he wants it done is Ohtani's $70 million a year by his contract, count the 70 and not the 46 in present day value. That wouldn't hurt, right? I don't know if it's a solution. I don't know that the union would go for it, but it's one idea. What I would also like to see are more draft picks for the low market teams, the small market teams. Adjustments to the draft, adjustments to revenue sharing, all these things can take place. And keep in mind, this is something else people don't consider when we're having this conversation. So I mentioned the Dodgers road attendance. Obviously, that generates money for other teams. Revenue sharing, in which the Dodgers are major contributors, that results in money going to lower revenue teams, and the luxury tax too. Half of the proceeds from the luxury tax penalties are going at the commissioner's discretion to low revenue teams, the ones that are building the revenue, and now teams that are losing TV money as well. So the Dodgers, in that sense, are good for the sport. They're making money for other clubs. And again, they're standing out as the villains, the model, whatever you want to call them. So this is an argument that, again, is framed by your personal perspective, where you live. But The Dodgers are operating in a way that fans of almost every team would want their teams to operate. That to me is the enduring lesson here. And maybe we do need, as I said, not even maybe, we do need, in my opinion, a new ownership class. And we're going to see some new owners coming online at some point soon. Baltimore has one, Minnesota is getting one, and there will be other changes as well. But to say that the sport is dying, to say that the sport is in a bad place, there simply are really no metrics to support that argument. Can the sport be better? Can the sport be fairer? Can the sport have a more level playing field? Sure, we can always do that. And there are always tweaks that can be made, some of which I suggested. But let's not overreact here. Let's not give the Dodgers the 2025 World Series, and let's not give other teams the excuse of not competing to the fullest. That is perhaps the biggest problem in the sport, that certain teams just don't go for it. The Marlins getting their $70 million in revenue sharing every year. Where are we seeing it on the field? We're not. So listen, I get the debate. It's a fair debate. It's one we should be having. But to tell me that the sport is dying and the Dodgers are bad for baseball and they're killing interest, simply no evidence to suggest that. Time now for Grillin Ken, the part of the show where you guys get to ask me your questions. All right, let's get to the first question. This one comes from Backhand Grab, who asks, why aren't the Marlins taking on bad contracts with 1 or 2 years left in exchange for good prospects? Higher payroll and stinking now leads to lower payroll and a quicker rebuild. This is a great question, and Steve Adams of MLBTradeRumors.com wrote a really interesting article about this over the weekend. I believe it was over the weekend. And basically, he was suggesting just what that viewer was thinking. Hey, take on bad contracts and take on additional prospects. Get them that way. You're effectively buying prospects when you do something like that. And the Marlins, like the A's, are in a position where they're going to have to justify their revenue sharing haul by getting their luxury tax payroll to a certain level. They're not near that level right now. So taking on bad contracts and getting the better prospects that way would be a strategy that would work for them from that perspective as well. I do not understand why the Marlins are operating the way they are. Obviously, there's still time left in the offseason, but I don't see it changing in a very dramatic way for them. All right, let's get to the final question. And this one comes from, oh boy, D-backs fan 223 at Corbin over Goldie. All right, the question the person asked, this D-backs fan asked, is what's the point? And I guess what he's asking, or she, is what's the point of even trying now that the Dodgers have assembled this super team? Well, Corbin over Goldie, let me suggest to you that your rotation right now is better than the Los Angeles Dodgers. And the Diamondbacks last year had the best offense in the major leagues, or one of them. So, yes, they've lost Christian Walker, replaced him with Josh Naylor. But in their rotation, Corbin Burnes, Zach Gallen, Merrill Kelly, Eduardo Rodriguez, Brandon Pfaadt, Ryan Nelson, and right now Jordan Montgomery, but he likely will be traded, or perhaps one of the other ones will. Their rotation is really good. And if they get another piece in the bullpen or two, they're going to be a really interesting team. A team that, when you have a Corbin Burnes and Zach Gallen, is capable of upsetting a team like the Dodgers in a short series, either 5 or 7 games. So again, ladies and gentlemen, the season is not over. It's upon us, or at least spring training is nearly upon us, and it's going to be a fun season. You know why? Because every season is a fun season, and if the Dodgers are really good, well, it will give everyone a target to shoot for, and if they go down, it will be that much sweeter for the team that knocks them off and that team's respective fan base. I want to thank everyone for their questions. I want to thank everyone for watching, for listening. You know where to find us. YouTube, Apple, Spotify. We will be back Thursday, 12:30 Eastern, our normal live show with Alana Rizzo. Have a great week, everyone.
BetMGM first bet $1,500 offer when you use the bonus code FOUL. Get this offer when you download the BetMGM Sportsbook app or at BetMGM.com. Sign up, enter that bonus code FOUL, and deposit at least $10 into your new account. Place your first wager, receive up to $1,500 back in bonus bets if the bet loses. If it does lose, your bonus bets will be available once your initial wager is settled. A gambling problem or concern? There's help. Call 1-800-GAMBLER.
Hey everybody, be sure to like and subscribe for more content. Fair Territory airs each week and we'd love for you to become part of our community. Here's another video you might enjoy. See you next time.